The House has resumed. The House is debating the Prime Minister's statement, and Stuart Nash has the call, and approximately 8 3/4 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was in the process of saying that the Prime Minister's statement to Parliament was a little bit like a wine tasting, where the expectation is built up. The bottle promises much, only to take a first taste and spit it out and disgust at the foul taste, Mr. Coleman, Dr. Coleman. The sort of taste I can imagine, Mr. Speaker, that many hard-working Kiwis will be experiencing when they do the sums upon realising that the national government is planning on increasing GST by 16%. Now that contradicts a statement made by John Key on the 20th of October 2008 when he said that if National does a half-decent job of growing the economy, then increasing GST will not be necessary. Enough said. Yes, the Prime Minister was right when he said in his speech that the tax system changes people's behaviour. Voting behaviour, I believe in this case, especially when it comes to a tax like GST. Long he might have said that even drug pushers have to pay GST, but so do the 78% of hard-working New Zealanders who earn less than the average wage, who aren't drug pushers, but the backbone of this wonderful country, working like hell to get ahead. And once again, like the tax cuts of last year, when anyone earning under 40,000 didn't even get a bone, National has pulled the rug out from underneath their feet. What about them, Mr. Key? The main reason I find GST difficult, an increase in GST so difficult to stomach, Mr. Speaker, is because it is regressive, meaning the less one earns, the greater one's percentage of one's wages and salary must be paid in GST. The government's tax working group says that it isn't regressive because, and I quote, people tend to base their current spending decisions not simply on their current income, but on their expected lifelong income, end quote. Well, maybe they do that when they're purchasing a house, but there is no GST on houses. However, I suspect that 78% of hard-working Kiwis who earn under the average wage tend to base their current spending decisions on what they can afford at the supermarket to feed their family, how much the school donation is going to be, how much it's going to cost to feed their children, how the hell they're going to afford to pay the power bill this month and the City Council rates are due, and how they're going to find the dollars to fill the car, to get to work, to earn the money so they can pay the increased GST for the top few to have a tax cut. Even Bill English has admitted that a rise in GST is unfair on families already struggling with the effects of a recession. I would like to relate something of interest, published in the Tax Working Group's report. It's a graph that shows the effects on growth of tax and public spending. The number one form of public spending identified by the Treasury officials and included in the Tax Working Group's report to promote economic growth is infrastructure. Now, for example, in Hawke's Bay, the local residents paid a 6-cent per litre tax that was levied only in the Bay on petrol sold in the Bay. The $81 million collected from this levy was to be spent on Hawke's Bay roads in order to drive Hawke's Bay infrastructure and economic growth. But this government stole, yes, Mr. Speaker, they stole that money from Hawke's Bay and put it into the Consolidated Roading Fund. So who knows where it's being spent? I agree, it's outrageous. But I can tell the people of Napier and Hastings that it isn't being spent on roads considered vital to Hawke's Bay's economic growth. And that's disgraceful. The second major item of public spending to increase economic growth, Mr. Speaker, according to Treasury and the Tax Working Group, is education. But in Hawke's Bay, as in around the country, there are no more night classes because this national government has cut adult and community education spending. So in the Bay, 6,000 people that were taking ACE courses and the 350 people who were employed as tutors are now no longer pumping an estimated $10 million into the Hawke's Bay economy. The Bay is going backwards under National, and it's not what they voted for. Now, I'm assuming Mr. Key has signalled a tax cut to the top marginal tax rates because he was informed by the Tax Working Group, and I quote, that in 1989 New Zealand's tax system was regarded as one of the least distortionary in the OECD. Its tax rates were comparably low. The corporate and the top personal tax rates were 33%, end quote. But, Mr. Speaker, what the report doesn't go on to say is that in the 1990s, New Zealand had 26% unemployment amongst its Pacifica population and 21% unemployment amongst the Maori population. But we had one of the least distortionary tax systems in the OECD. Can I tell the tax working group and Mr. Key that sometimes it is not just about the money. Sometimes we have to ask, what is the human cost of having one of the least distortionary tax systems in the OECD? The cost last time was horrendous, Sir Roger. I would support 100% the findings of the tax working group around tax alignment of the company, trust and top marginal rates if, with one of the least distortionary tax systems in the OECD, companies and jobs came flooding into this country, resulting in massive employment opportunities for those who were struggling. But this was not the case. Our deregulated economy, with one of the least regulated tax systems, nearly destroyed the fabric of our community. At the Tax Working Group conference, Mr. Speaker, there was a lone voice amongst the wilderness. Many were there talking about radical changes that were going to improve the viability of our broken system, flat taxes, capital taxes, land taxes, increases in GST, the dreadful effect on working for families, the heavy burden borne by those in the top 10% of taxpayers, etc., etc. But then a woman stood up, a very well qualified and incredibly able woman, and she spoke for those who weren't represented at the conference. Dr. Jill St. John asked the question, what will these proposed changes mean for the disadvantaged in our society? 350,000 hard-working Kiwi families received the Working for Families hand up, Mr. Speaker. The percentage of children in poverty has dropped from 26% in 2004 to 19% in 2008. Still, far too many, but we are making progress. And why were there so many children in poverty? Because of the economic changes of the 1980s and 90s. These wealthy, well-educated and extremely articulate tax practitioners were talking about working for families as if it were just a series of numbers on a spreadsheet to be tossed around and manipulated. Well, Mr. Key, with the greatest of respect, I can assure you, for the many of the 350,000 families, the hand-up provided by Working for Families is the difference between survival and something more insidious. By all means, close down the loophole that around 2,000 people are taking advantage of, but don't you dare tinker with the livelihoods of 350,000 hard-working Kiwi families. Jill St. John's presentation for me was the most uplifting because she was the only one who spoke up about the social implications of changes to the tax system. She spoke for the many, not the few, as Phil Goff did today, for the 78% of Kiwis who earn below the average wage. People listened to her rather uncomfortably because what she said they didn't want to hear. She asked, and I quote, "Is the focus on the company tax rate actually the right focus?" Jill St. John finished, and the next chap gave a talk on the benefits of increasing GST. How much money could be raised if the government raised GST to 15%, 17.5%, 20%? It's as if Dr. St. John hadn't even spoken. And the very strong impression I got from listening to Mr. Key's speech today is that she hasn't been heard. This is a great shame because she makes a lot of sense. I suppose, Mr. Speaker, we dared to believe it was going to be radical, the speech today. At least Key could have had the courage of his convictions, but he really is the new hollow man of New Zealand politics. As for his team, well, boys, smile and wave, smile and wave. Thank you.